Flanagans never suspected for a moment that the girl they read about in the newspaper over the next few years, missing, foul play suspected, elbow found by neighboring dog, girl 14, believed killed in Solfoot's cornfield, warnings to other young women, to township to rezone adjoining lots to high school. Lindsay Salmon, sister of dead girl, gives valedictorian speech. Could have been in the gray metal safe that a lonely man brought over one night and paid them $20 to sink. On the way back to the wagon, Mr. Harvey put his hand in his pockets. There was my silver charm bracelet. He couldn't remember taking it off my wrist. Had no memory of thrusting it into the pocket of his clean pants. He fingered it, the fleshy pad of his index finger finding the smooth gold metal of the Pennsylvania keystone, the back of the ballet slipper, the tiny hole of the minuscule thimble, and the spokes of the bicycle with wheels that worked. Down Route 202, he pulled over a shoulder, ate a liverwurst sandwich she'd prepared earlier that day, then drove to an industrial park they were building south of Downington. No one was on the construction lot. In those days, there was no security in the suburbs. He parked his car near a porta-john. His excuse was prepared in the unlikely event that he needed one. It was this part of the aftermath that I thought of when I thought of Mr. Harvey. How he wandered the muddy excavations and got lost among the dormant bulldozers, their monstrous bulk frightening in the dark. The sky of the earth was dark blue on the night following my death, and out in this open area, Mr. Harvey could see for miles. I chose to stand with him, to see those miles ahead as he saw them. I wanted to go where he would go. The snow had stopped. There was no wind. He walked into what was his builder's instincts told him would soon be a false pond, and he stood there and fingered the charms one last time. He liked the Pennsylvania keystone, which my father had engraved with my initials. My favorite was the tiny bike, and he pulled it off and placed it in his pocket. He threw the bracelet, with his remaining charms, into the soon-to-be man-made lake. 2 days before Christmas, I watched Mr. Harvey read a book on the Doggin and Bambara of Mali. I saw the bright spark of an idea when he was reading of the cloth and ropes they used to build shelters. He decided he wanted to build again, to experiment as he had with the whole, and he settled on a ceremonial tent like the ones described in his reading. He would gather the simple materials and raise it in a few hours in his backyard. After smashing all the ships and bottles, my father found him there. It was cold out, but Mr. Harvey wore only a thin cotton shirt. He had turned 36 this year and was experimenting with hard contacts. They made his eyes perpetually bloodshot, and many people, my father among them, believed he had taken to drinking. "What's this?" my father asked. Despite the salmon men's heart disease, my father was hardy. He was a bigger man than Mr. Harvey, so when he walked around the front of the green shingled house and into the backyard, where he saw Mr. Harvey erecting things that looked like goalposts, he seemed bluff and able. He was buzzing from having seen me in the shattered glass. I watched him cut through the lawn, ambling as school kids did on their way toward the high school. He stopped just short of brushing Mr. Harvey's elderberry hedge with his palm. "What's this?" he asked again. Mr. Harvey stopped long enough to look at him and then turned back to his work. "A mat tent? What's that?" "Mr. Salmon," he said, "I'm sorry for your loss." Drawing himself up, my father gave back what the ritual demanded. "Thank you." It was like a rock perched in his throat. There was a moment of quiet, and then Mr. Harvey, sensing my father had no intention of leaving, asked him if he wanted to help. So as that, from heaven, I watched my father build a tent with the man who'd killed me. My father did not learn much. He learned how to lash arch pieces onto prolonged posts and to weave more slender rods through those pieces to form semi-arches in the other direction. He learned to gather the ends of these rods and lash them to the crossbars. He learned he was doing this because Mr. Harvey had been reading about the Mzarek tribe and had wanted to replicate their tents. He stood, confirmed in the neighborhood opinion that the man was odd. So far, that was all. But when the basic structure was done, a 1-hour job, Mr. Harvey went toward the house without giving a reason. My father assumed it was break time, that Mr. Harvey had gone in to get coffee or brew a pot of tea. He was wrong. Mr. Harvey went into the house and up the stairs to check on the carving knife that he had put in his bedroom. It was still in the nightstand, on top of which he kept his sketch pad, where often in the middle of the night he drew the designs in his dreams. He looked inside a crumpled paper grocery bag. My blood on the blade had turned black. Remembering his act in the hole, made him remember what he had read about a particular tribe in southern air. How when a tent was made for a newly married couple, the women of the tribe made the sheet that will cover it as beautiful as they could. It had begun to snow outside. It was the first snow since my death, and this was not lost on my father. "I can hear you, honey," he said to me, even though I wasn't talking. "What is it?" I focused very hard on the dead geranium in his line of vision. I thought if I could make it bloom, he would have his answer. In my heaven, it bloomed. In my heaven, geranium petals swirled in eddies up to my waist. On earth, nothing happened. But through the snow, I noticed this. My father was looking toward the greenhouse in a new way. He had begun to wonder. Inside, Mr. Harvey had donned a heavy flannel shirt, but what my father noticed first was what he carried in his arms, a stack of white cotton sheets. "What are those for?" my father asked. Suddenly, he could not stop seeing my face. "Tarps," said Mr. Harvey. When he handed a stack to my father, the back of his hand touched my father's fingers. It was like an electric shock. "You know something," my father said. He met my father's eyes, held them, but did not speak. They worked together, the snow falling, almost wafting down. And as my father moved, his adrenaline raced. He checked what he knew. Had anyone asked this man where he was the day I disappeared? Had anyone seen this man in the cornfield? He knew his neighbors had been questioned. Methodically, the police had gone from door to door. My father and Mr. Harvey spread the sheets over the domed arch, anchoring them along the square formed by the crossbars that linked the forked posts. Then they hung the remaining sheets straight down from these crossbars, so the bottom of the sheets brushed the ground. By the time they had finished, the snow sat gingerly on the covered arches. It filled in the hollows of my father's shirt and lay in a line across the top of his belt. I ached. I realized I would never rush out into the snow with Holiday again. Would never push Lindsay on a sled. Would never teach against my better judgment my little brother how to compact snow by shaping it against the base of his palms. I stood alone in a sea of bright petals. On earth, the snowflakes fell soft and blameless, a curtain descending. Standing inside the tent, Mr. Harvey thought of how the virgin bride would be brought to a member in the Mzarek on a camel. When my father made a move toward him, Mr. Harvey put his palm up. "That's enough now," he said. "Why don't you go on home?" The time had come for my father to think of something to say, but all he could think of was this. "Susie," he whispered. The second syllable whipped like a snake. "We've just built a tent," Mr. Harvey said. "The neighbors saw us. We're friends now." "You know something," my father said. Go home. I can't help you. Mr. Harvey did not smile or step forward. He retreated into the bridal tent and let the final monogrammed white cotton sheet fall down.